This is the story of Mrs. Peter Rabbit by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 1. Peter Rabbit loses his appetite. Good appetite you'll always find depends upon your state of mind. Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit had lost his appetite. Now, when Peter Rabbit loses his appetite, something is very wrong indeed with him. Peter has boasted that he can eat any time and all the time. In fact, the two things Peter thinks about most are his stomach and satisfying his curiosity. And nearly all of the scrapes that Peter has gotten into have been because of those two things. So when Peter loses his appetite or his curiosity, there is surely something the matter with him. Ever since Old Man Coyote had come to live on the Green Meadows, Peter had been afraid to go very far from the dear Old Briar patch where he makes his home and where he always feels safe. Now, there wasn't any reason why he should go far from the dear Old Briar patch. There was plenty to eat in it and all around it, for sweet clover grew almost up to the very edge of it. And Peter is very fond of sweet clover. So there was plenty for Peter to eat without running any risks of danger. With nothing to do but eat and sleep, Peter should have grown fat and contented, but he didn't. Now that is just the way with a lot of people. The more they have and the less they have to worry about, the more discontented they become, and at last they are positively unhappy. There was little Danny Meadow Mouse living out on Green Meadows. He was happy all the livelong day, and yet he had no safe castle like the dear Old Briar patch, where he could always be safe. Every minute of every day, Danny had to keep his eyes wide open and his wits working their very quickest, for any minute he was likely to be in danger. Old Man Coyote or Reddy Fox or Granny Fox or Digger the Badger or Mr. Blacksnake was likely to come creeping through the grass any time, and they are always hungry for a fat meadow mouse. And as if that weren't worry enough, Danny had to watch the sky, too, for old Whitetail the Marsh Hawk or his cousin Redtail or Blacky the Crow, each of whom would be glad of a Meadow Mouse dinner. Yet in spite of all this, Danny was happy and never once lost his appetite. But Peter Rabbit, with nothing to worry him so long as he stayed in the Old Briar patch, couldn't eat and grew more and more unhappy. "I don't know what's the matter with me. I really don't know what's the matter with me," said Peter, as he turned up his nose at a patch of sweet, tender young clover. "I think I'll go and cut some new paths through the Old Briar patch." Now, though he didn't know it, that was the very best thing he could do. It gave him something to think about. For 2 or 3 days he was very busy cutting new paths, and his appetite came back. But when he had made all the paths he wanted, and there was nothing else to do, he lost his appetite again. He just sat still all day long and moped and thought and thought and thought. The trouble with Peter Rabbit's thinking was that it was all about himself and how unhappy he was. Of course, the more he thought about this, the more unhappy he grew. "If I only had someone to talk to, I'd feel better," said he to himself. That reminded him of Johnny Chuck and what good times they used to have together when Johnny lived on the Green Meadows. Then he thought of how happy Johnny seemed with his little family in his new home in the old orchard, in spite of all the worries his family made him. And right then, Peter found out what was the matter with him. "I believe I'm just lonesome," said Peter. "Yes, sir, that's what's the matter with me. It isn't good to be alone, I've often heard my mother say. It makes one selfish, grouchy, cross, and quite unhappy all the day. One needs to think of other folks and not of just oneself alone to find the truest happiness and joy and real content to own. Now that I've found out what's the trouble with me, the question is, what am I going to do about it?" Chapter 2. Peter Rabbit Plans a Journey. It's a long jump that makes no landing. Peter Rabbit. "The trouble with me is that I'm lonesome," repeated Peter Rabbit as he sat in the dear Old Briar patch. "Yes, sir, that's the only thing that's wrong with me. I'm just tired of myself, and that's why I've lost my appetite. And now I know what's the matter. What am I going to do about it? If I were sure, absolutely sure, that Old Man Coyote meant what he said about our being friends, I'd start this very minute to call on all my old friends. My, it seems an age since I visited the Smiling Pool and saw Grandfather Frog and Jerry Muskrat and Billy Mink and Little Joe Otter. Mr. Coyote sounded as if he really meant to leave me alone, but, well, perhaps he did mean it when he saw me sitting here safe among the brambles. But if I should meet him out in the open, he might change his mind. And, oh dear, his teeth are terrible long and sharp." Peter sat a little longer, thinking and thinking. Then a bright idea popped into his head. He kicked up his heels. "I'll do it," said he. "I'll make a journey. That's what I'll do. I'll make a journey and see the great world. By staying here and sitting still, I'm sure I'll simply grow quite ill. A change of scene is what I need to be from all my trouble freed." Of course, if Peter had really stopped to think the matter over thoroughly, he would have known that running away from one kind of trouble is almost sure to lead to other troubles. But Peter is one of those who does his thinking afterward. Peter is what he is called impulsive. That is, he does things and then thinks about them later and often wishes he hadn't done them. So now, the minute the idea of making a journey popped into his head, he made up his mind that he would do it, and that was all there was to it. You see, Peter never looks ahead. If he could get rid of the trouble that bothered him now, which, was nothing but lonesomeness, he wouldn't worry about the troubles he might get into later. Now, the minute Peter made up his mind to make a journey, he began to feel better. His lost appetite returned, and the first thing he did was to eat a good meal of sweet clover. "Let me see," said he as he filled his big stomach. "I believe I'll visit the Old Pasture. It's a long way off, and I've never been there, but I've heard Sammy Jay say that it's a very wonderful place, and I don't believe it's any more dangerous than the Green Meadows and the Green Forest now that Old Man Coyote and Reddy and Granny Fox are all living here. I'll start tonight when I'm sure that Old Man Coyote is nowhere around, and I won't tell a soul where I am going." So Peter settled himself and tried to sleep all the long day, but his mind was so full of the long journey he was going to make that he couldn't sleep much. And when he did have a nap, he dreamed of wonderful sights and adventures out in the great world. At last he saw jolly, round, red Mr. Sun drop down to his bed behind the Purple Hills. Old Mother West Wind came hurrying back from her day's work and gathered her little children, the Merry Little Breezes, into her big bag, and then she too started for her home behind the Purple Hills. A little star came out and winked at Peter, and then way over on the edge of the Green Forest he heard Old Man Coyote laugh. Peter grinned. That's what he had been waiting for, since it meant that Old Man Coyote was so far away that there was nothing to fear from him. Peter hopped out from the dear, safe old briar patch, looked this way and that way, and then, with his heart in his mouth, started toward the old pasture as fast as he could go. Lipperty-lip, lipperty-lip.